A millionaire walked into a sophisticated restaurant, not imagining that something there would change his life forever. Among the tables, a frail girl was collecting leftovers with a red apron and a gaze that said it all. When he asked the reason, her answer was as raw as it was impossible to ignore. In the twilight atmosphere of the Silver Spoon, one of New York City's most exclusive restaurants, Richard Kendall entered with the confident stride that had become his trademark. At 45, he commanded respect as the CEO of Horizon Technologies, a company whose market value had tripled under his leadership. His tailored Armani suit and the subtle platinum watch on his wrist were silent testaments to his success. Yet tonight, something else would capture his attention. As the maitre d' led him to his usual corner table, Richard noticed a small figure moving between the tables. A child, no more than 5 years old, wearing an oversized red apron, was carefully gathering leftover food into a small plastic container. The girl's methodical movements suggested this wasn't play but purpose. Her eyes, though young, held a seriousness that seemed profoundly out of place on such a small face. Richard watched, momentarily forgetting about his business dinner. The restaurant staff seemed to ignore the child completely, as if her presence was routine. When she approached his table to collect bread that remained in the basket, Richard gently spoke up. "Hello there," he said, his voice softer than usual. "That's quite a job you're doing." The girl looked up, startled. Her brown eyes widened with apprehension, but she didn't run away. Instead, she straightened her small shoulders and replied, "It's my reward. I help clean and they let me take food home." Her voice was clear and articulate, surprising Richard. "Your reward?" He echoed, unable to mask his concern. "Do you come here often?" "Every night," she nodded, adjusting her apron. "Except Mondays when they're closed." Richard felt something twist inside him, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. "What's your name?" "Lily," she answered, glancing nervously at the kitchen doors. "I need to finish before Mr. Peterson sees me talking instead of working." "Is Mr. Peterson the owner?" Richard asked, already making mental notes. Lily nodded, then quickly added, "He's nice. He lets me take extra bread sometimes." Richard's dinner companions arrived then, 3 executives from a potential partner company. Throughout the meal, he found his attention drifting to the small figure circling the dining room. Every business platitude uttered across the table seemed hollow compared to the reality of a kindergarten-aged child working for food scraps mere feet away. When his associates left, Richard remained nursing a cognac and watching as Lily finished her rounds. When she headed toward the kitchen with her container, he approached the bar where a middle-aged man with a meticulously trimmed beard was reviewing receipts. "Mr. Peterson?" Richard inquired. The man looked up, instantly recognizing one of his most valuable customers. "Mr. Kendall, always a pleasure. Was everything to your satisfaction tonight?" "The food was excellent as always," Richard said diplomatically. "I'm curious about the young girl with the red apron." Peterson's smile wavered slightly. "Little Lily, sad situation, that one. Mother's sick, no father in the picture. We let her collect leftovers instead of throwing everything away. Helps us both, you know. No harm in it." "She can't be more than 5 years old," Richard said, his voice level but eyes sharp. "She's a tough little thing," Peterson shrugged. "Been coming here almost a year now. Started when her mother could still walk her here. Now she makes the trip herself." He said this as if it were an accomplishment to be proud of, not a 5-year-old navigating Manhattan streets alone. "And no one has questioned this arrangement?" Richard pressed. Peterson's expression hardened slightly. "Look, Mr. Kendall, I know what you're thinking, but we're helping her. Without this food, they'd have next to nothing. The system isn't exactly rushing to their rescue. I'm giving her dignity. She works for what she takes home." Richard wanted to argue that dignity shouldn't be something a kindergartner had to earn, but he held his tongue. Confrontation wouldn't help Lily. "I understand," he said instead. "Thank you for the explanation." He returned to his table just as Lily emerged from the kitchen, her red apron removed and folded carefully in her hands. Her plastic container was now tucked inside a small backpack. She wore a thin jacket that seemed inadequate for the October chill outside. Following an impulse he didn't fully understand, Richard approached her. "Lily, it's getting dark. Would you like me to walk you home?" She assessed him with surprising wariness for someone so young. "My mom says not to go with strangers." Your mom is very wise, Richard nodded. My name is Richard Kendall. I eat here often. He pulled out his business card, something he never gave to just anyone, and handed it to her. Now I'm not a complete stranger. Lily took the card, studying it with remarkable concentration. You have a tall building, she said, recognizing the Horizon Technologies logo. I do, Richard smiled. And I promise I just want to make sure you get home safely. After a moment's hesitation, Lily nodded. Okay, but I know the way myself. I'm not a baby. I never thought you were, Richard said, holding the door open for her. Outside, the contrast between the restaurant's warmth and the city's evening chill was stark. Lily led the way with the confidence of someone who had memorized every turn. They headed east, then south, leaving behind the gleaming facades of Midtown for neighborhoods where prosperity thinned with each block. How old are you, Lily? Richard asked as they waited at a crosswalk. 5 3/4, she answered promptly. Shall be 6 in December. And you go to school? A shadow crossed her face. Sometimes, when Mom is having a good day and can take me. What about your dad? Richard asked carefully. He went away, Lily said matter-of-factly. Mom says he wasn't ready to be a father. That happens sometimes. The simple acceptance in her voice made Richard's chest tighten. They turned down a narrower street, where storefronts had security gates and apartment buildings showed signs of neglect. Lily led him to a 5-story walk-up, its facade crumbling in places. I live on the 4th floor, she explained. The elevator doesn't work anymore. Richard followed her up the stairs, noticing how she carefully held the railing, how the building smelled of damp and old cooking. When they reached the 4th floor, Lily approached a door at the end of the hallway and knocked in a specific pattern. Mom, it's me, she called. I brought food. The door opened slowly to reveal a woman who might once have been beautiful, but now appeared gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. She wore a faded robe cinched tightly around her waist, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes widened with alarm when she saw Richard. Lily, who is this? She asked, her voice hoarse but protective, as she pulled her daughter closer. This is Mr. Richard, Lily explained. He has a building. He walked me home because it's dark. Richard extended his hand. Richard Kendall. I apologize for the intrusion, Miss Thompson. Emma Thompson, she replied, cautiously accepting his handshake. Her hand felt fragile in his. Thank you for escorting Lily, but we're fine. We don't need charity. Mom, Lily protested, Mr. Richard is nice. He gave me his card with his building on it. Emma glanced at the business card in Lily's hand, recognition dawning in her eyes. Horizon Technologies. You're that Richard Kendall. Richard nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with his wealth in the face of their obvious struggle. I was concerned about Lily walking home alone after I saw her at the Silver Spoon. Emma's expression hardened. Mr. Peterson lets her bring home food. It helps us get by. I understand, Richard said carefully, but surely there are better options than having your daughter work for scraps. Better options? Emma's laugh was bitter. Mr. Kendall, when you've exhausted every better option, you take what you can get. Now, if you'll excuse us, Lily needs to eat and get to bed. Richard knew he was being dismissed, but felt unable to simply walk away. Miss Thompson, I don't mean to overstep, but if there's any way I could help. We've managed this long without a billionaire's pity, Emma interrupted, though her voice lacked conviction. A cough shook her thin frame, and she leaned against the doorframe for support. Mom? Lily's voice was small, worried. I'm okay, sweetheart, Emma assured her, but Richard could see she was anything but. Please, Richard said quietly. At least let me help you get to a doctor. Emma looked at him, pride battling with pragmatism in her eyes. Finally, she sighed. Why? Why would you care about 2 strangers? Richard looked at Lily, who was unpacking her container of food scraps with the seriousness of a surgeon handling vital organs. Then he looked back at Emma, seeing the fierce protection in her eyes despite her weakened state. Because tonight I saw something that I can't unsee, he answered honestly. And I don't think I could live with myself if I just walked away. Emma studied him for a long moment, then stepped back slightly, a silent invitation to enter their small world. As Richard crossed the threshold, he had no way of knowing how completely this decision would transform not just their lives, but his own. The apartment was smaller than Richard had expected, a single room with a curtained-off area, that presumably served as a bedroom. A kitchenette occupied one corner, its countertop cluttered with pill bottles and a hot plate. The furnishings were sparse: a worn sofa, a small table with two mismatched chairs, and a bookshelf, stuffed with children's books, perhaps the only luxury afforded to Lily. "Please sit," Emma said, gesturing to the sofa while she helped Lily unpack her food container at the table. Richard noticed how Emma's hands trembled slightly as she transferred the restaurant leftovers onto chipped plates. He sat, taking in the details of their lives. Despite the obvious poverty, the apartment was meticulously clean. Crayon drawings adorned the walls, mostly depicting a blonde woman and a small girl holding hands beneath bright suns and rainbow skies. On the windowsill, a row of small plants grew in repurposed cans, a touch of life and color in the otherwise bleak space. "What exactly do you do at Horizon Technologies, Mr. Kendall?" Emma asked as she settled Lily at the table with her dinner, a hodgepodge of half-eaten bread rolls, vegetable sides, and what appeared to be portions of steak trimmed from customers' plates. "Please, call me Richard," he said. "I'm the CEO. We develop software solutions for healthcare systems." He paused, watching as Emma took only a small portion for herself, leaving the majority for her daughter. "Biz Thompson, won't you eat more?" "Emma," she corrected him. "And I'm not very hungry tonight." Lily looked up from her plate. "Mom always says that. She gives me the big parts and takes the small parts." Emma shot her daughter a gentle look of reproach. "Lily, remember our conversation about some things being private?" Richard reached for his phone. "Would you mind if I ordered some dinner for all of us? I haven't eaten properly myself." "We don't need," Emma began. "Pizza." Lily interjected hopefully, then immediately looked down at her plate. "Sorry, Mom." Richard saw the conflict in Emma's eyes, pride warring with practical need. "Please," he said quietly, "for my sake, it would make me feel better about intruding on your evening." After a moment, Emma nodded slightly. Richard ordered, adding a grocery delivery with essentials he suspected they needed. While they waited, he gently steered the conversation toward Emma's condition. "How long have you been ill?" he asked. Emma sighed, twisting a loose thread on her robe. "It started about 18 months ago. Nothing dramatic: fatigue, persistent cough. I thought it was just stress." She glanced at Lily, who was now coloring at the table, seemingly absorbed but undoubtedly listening. "I was working 2 jobs then, trying to get back on my feet after my dad left," Lily supplied without looking up from her drawing. "Yes," Emma acknowledged softly. "Anyway, by the time I got to a clinic, what started as pneumonia had become something more complicated. Without insurance, I received basic treatment, but I needed follow-up care I couldn't afford." She shrugged, a gesture of resignation that struck Richard as profoundly unfair. "I lost my jobs because I couldn't keep up. Then the medical bills started piling up, and here we are. What did you do before?" "For work?" Richard asked. A spark of something, pride perhaps, animated Emma's tired face. "I was a clothing designer. Not famous or anything, but I was building a reputation. I specialized in sustainable fashion, transforming discarded textiles into new pieces." She gestured toward a sewing machine in the corner, covered with a cloth. "I had an opportunity with Meridian Apparel about a year ago, a real breakthrough chance. Then suddenly the offer was withdrawn. They claimed to have received information that made me a liability." Richard frowned. "What kind of information?" "I never found out exactly, just that it was highly concerning and verified by multiple sources." Her laugh was hollow. "The closest I got to an explanation was a hint from an HR person who felt sorry for me. Apparently the report suggested I had connections to labor exploitation in overseas manufacturing, which is absurd. My entire career was built on ethical production." Before Richard could respond, a knock at the door announced the food delivery. The arrival of hot pizza transformed the atmosphere. Lily's eyes widened at the sight of a whole pie just for them, and even Emma couldn't suppress a smile at her daughter's excitement. As they ate, Richard observed the dynamics between mother and daughter, the gentle corrections, the inside jokes, the way Emma wiped tomato sauce from Lily's chin without interrupting her enthusiastic story about a book she was reading at school. Despite everything, there was love here and resilience. When Lily began to yawn, Emma excused herself to put her daughter to bed behind the curtained area of the apartment. Richard heard soft murmurs and a child's giggle. then the rhythmic cadence of a bedtime story. He found himself listening intently, moved by the tender ritual unfolding just feet away. Emma returned looking exhausted but somehow lighter. She wanted me to thank you for the pizza. She says it was the best day since her birthday. Richard felt a pang at how such a simple gesture could be considered a special occasion. Emma, I want to help you both. Properly, not just with one meal. She stiffened. Mr. Kendall. Richard, he corrected gently. Richard, she conceded. I appreciate your concern, but we're not a charity case. We've managed this long. Have you? He challenged softly. Your daughter is collecting food scraps instead of attending school regularly. You're clearly unwell and not receiving proper treatment. This isn't managing. It's surviving by the thinnest margin. Emma's eyes flashed. You don't understand what it's like. The system isn't built for people who fall through the cracks. Every program has requirements we somehow don't meet. Every opportunity comes with catches we can't accommodate. She wrapped her arms around herself. Do you think I want this for Lily? That I wouldn't give anything to change our circumstances? Then let me help, Richard insisted. I have resources, connections. At minimum, you need proper medical care. And then what? Emma challenged. You'll feel good about your charitable act and go back to your life, while we're left to figure out the next step? I've seen how this works, Richard. The wealthy swoop in, make grand gestures, then disappear when the reality of sustained support becomes inconvenient. Her words struck Richard like a physical blow, partly because he recognized their potential truth. How many charity galas had he attended, writing checks without ever following up on the actual impact? How many times had he considered his obligation fulfilled once the donation was made? You're right to be skeptical, he acknowledged, but I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that I'm different. He reached into his pocket and placed a card on the table. This is my personal number. Not my assistant's, not my office, mine. I'm coming back tomorrow with a doctor who makes house calls for my company executives. So after that, we can discuss next steps, whatever you're comfortable with. Emma studied the card, her expression guarded. Why? Why would someone like you bother with someone like me? Richard considered his answer carefully. Because tonight, I saw your daughter performing a task no child should have to do, with more dignity and determination than most adults I know, because you're clearly fighting with everything you have for her future. And because I have the ability to help, which means I also have the responsibility. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Emma picked up the card. The doctor can come. After that, we'll see. Richard nodded, accepting the conditional trust for what it was. A beginning. He stood to leave, suddenly aware of how intrusive his presence must seem in their small space. At the door, he turned back. Emma, may I ask what you were designing before you became ill? What was your specialty? The question seemed to surprise her. Children's clothing, actually. Sustainable, durable pieces that could be adjusted as kids grow. Why, just curious, Richard said. I'll see you tomorrow. Is 10 o'clock acceptable? We'll be here, Emma replied, a touch of wry humor in her voice. It's not like we have a busy social calendar. Richard left the building and stepped into the night, the contrast between the world he'd just left and the one he was returning to stark in its inequity. His driver was waiting at the curb, having tracked Richard's phone location as instructed earlier. Back to the penthouse, sir? The driver asked as he held the car door. Yes, James, Richard replied, his mind already churning with plans and phone calls he would need to make. Tomorrow would bring challenges. He knew that arranging medical care was just the first step in what would likely be a complicated situation. His business associates would question his involvement, his board might see it as a distraction, and there was the matter of exactly how far his assistance should extend. But as the car pulled away from the curb, Richard found himself replaying the image of Lily, carefully collecting food scraps in her oversized red apron. Her small face set with determination beyond her years, and he knew with unexpected certainty that he was already past the point of simply walking away. In his penthouse that night, surrounded by designer furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Manhattan's glittering skyline, Richard found himself standing in his immaculate kitchen, staring at the contents of his refrigerator. It was stocked weekly by his housekeeper, premium ingredients he rarely used since he typically ate at restaurants or ordered in. The abundance suddenly seemed obscene compared to the carefully rationed leftovers in Emma and Lily's apartment. He closed the refrigerator door and moved to his home office, opening his laptop. Before doubt could creep in, he began researching medical specialists for chronic respiratory conditions, educational options for children with interrupted schooling, and local organizations that supported single parents in crisis. As the night deepened, Richard found himself more engaged, more purposeful than he had felt in years. The familiar emptiness of his luxurious apartment, an emptiness he usually filled with work, seemed less oppressive as he focused on concrete steps he could take tomorrow. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Richard Kendall fell asleep, not thinking about market projections or acquisition strategies, but about a small apartment across town where a little girl in a red apron dreamed beneath crayon rainbows and her mother kept watch despite her own battles. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm Richard hadn't anticipated. Dr. Eleanor Chen, his company's top medical consultant, diagnosed Emma with a treatable but serious respiratory condition exacerbated by prolonged pneumonia and inadequate medical care. The treatment plan was comprehensive: medication, proper nutrition, regular checkups, and critically, a healthier living environment. That apartment is making her worse, Dr. Chen told Richard privately after her third visit. The building has moisture issues, possibly mold. She needs clean air and less stress to fully recover. Richard nodded, already formulating plans. He'd secured Emma's permission to cover her medical expenses, presenting it as a temporary arrangement until she could get back on her feet. Pride made her resistant initially, but Lily's needs proved a powerful motivator. Today marked his 11th visit in 3 weeks. Richard knocked on the apartment door, carrying grocery bags and a children's book he'd spotted in a bookstore window. The door opened to reveal Lily, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Mr. Richard, did you bring the strawberry yogurt?" She bounced on her toes, a dramatic change from the serious child he'd first encountered. "Hello to you too," he chuckled, stepping inside. "And yes, it's in the blue bag." Emma emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp from a shower, looking marginally healthier than when they'd first met. The dark circles under her eyes had lightened, and she'd regained a hint of color in her cheeks. "Sorry, I wasn't expecting you for another hour," she said, self-consciously tightening the belt of her robe. "My last meeting finished early," Richard explained, setting down the groceries. "I can come back if this isn't a good time." "No, it's fine. Let me just get dressed." Emma disappeared behind the curtain while Lily eagerly unpacked the groceries, arranging items with surprising meticulousness for a 5-year-old. Richard had learned that this was typical Lily, mature beyond her years in some ways, yet still very much a child in others. The first time he'd brought her a stuffed animal, she'd stared at it in confusion before carefully placing it on a shelf for special occasions. It had taken gentle encouragement from both Richard and Emma to convince her that toys were meant to be played with, not preserved. Emma returned wearing simple jeans and a sweater, both well-worn but clean. "You didn't need to bring more groceries. We still have plenty from last time." "Consider it selfish," Richard replied with the easy banter they'd developed. "I'm coming for dinner tonight, remember? I'm just ensuring there's something edible." This was their arrangement now. Richard would join them for dinner twice a week, bringing groceries under the pretense that he was tired of restaurant food and missed home cooking. It allowed Emma to accept his help without feeling like a charity case. In return, she prepared simple but delicious meals that reminded Richard of what family dinners should feel like. "Lily, why don't you show Mr. Richard your school project while I start dinner?" Emma suggested. Lily nodded eagerly, pulling Richard to the table where papers covered with careful handwriting and colorful drawings were spread out. "It's about communities," she explained seriously. "Miss Rodriguez says communities are people who help each other. I wrote about our community." Richard sat beside her, genuinely interested. "May I see?" Lily handed him her work, watching his face anxiously. The project featured a surprisingly skilled drawing of 3 figures: a small girl with braids, a taller woman with blonde hair, and a man in what appeared to be a business suit. Around them were smaller drawings of a doctor, a teacher, and curiously the restaurant owner, Mr. Peterson. Above the figures in careful block letters, "My Community." "This is excellent." "Lily," Richard said, genuinely impressed. "Who are all these people?" That's me, that's Mom, and that's you, Lily explained, pointing to each figure. Those are the other people who help us. Dr. Chen fixed Mom's breathing. Miss Rodriguez helps me learn. Mr. Peterson lets me take food, but I don't do that anymore. She looked up at Richard. Mom says we don't need to now that we have a... She frowned, searching for the word. A friend, Emma supplied from the kitchen, her back to them as she chopped vegetables. A friend, Lily repeated, testing the word. Then she leaned closer to Richard, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Are you going to go away someday like my dad did? The question caught Richard off guard, a sucker punch of innocent worry. Before he could respond, Emma intervened. Lily, remember what we discussed about personal questions? She approached the table, wiping her hands on a dish towel. It's all right, Richard assured her, then turned to Lily. That's a fair question. I can't promise I'll be here every day forever, but I can promise I won't just disappear. Friends don't do that to each other. Lily considered this seriously, then nodded. Pinky promise? She extended her small finger. Pinky promise, Richard agreed, completing the solemn ritual. As Lily returned to her project satisfied, he caught Emma watching them with an unreadable expression. Later, after a dinner of spaghetti and a surprisingly competitive game of Go Fish, Lily was tucked into bed. Richard and Emma sat at the small table, mugs of tea between them. She's doing better at school, Emma said quietly. Her teacher says she's catching up quickly. She's incredibly bright, Richard agreed, and the regular attendance is making a difference. Thanks to you, Emma acknowledged, a rare direct reference to his help. The cab fare you've been providing ensures she gets there regardless of how I'm feeling. Richard nodded, then decided to broach the subject he'd been considering for days. Emma, I have a proposition I'd like you to consider. She raised an eyebrow, wariness immediately replacing the relaxed atmosphere. What kind of proposition? I own a building in Chelsea, a brownstone I bought years ago as an investment. The garden apartment is currently vacant. It's not enormous, but it has 2 bedrooms and a small outdoor space. He watched her expression carefully. I'd like you and Lily to consider moving there. Emma's face closed off immediately. Richard, that's too much. We've already accepted more help than I'm comfortable with. Hear me out, he urged. Dr. Chen is concerned about this apartment's effect on your health. The Chelsea place is clean, has good air quality, and is 6 blocks from Lily's school. We could never afford... I'm not offering charity, Richard interrupted. I'm offering an opportunity. The garden level needs renovation before I can list it at market rate. In lieu of rent, you could oversee the updates, choose fixtures, manage contractors, that sort of thing. You have an eye for design, and it would give you a project while you continue recovering. Emma studied him suspiciously. That sounds like a convenient arrangement to make me feel better about accepting charity. Richard smiled slightly. Maybe partially, but I genuinely do need someone to manage the renovation, and you genuinely do need a healthier living environment. It's mutually beneficial. And what happens when the renovation is complete? When I'm healthy again? Do we just move back here? By then you'll hopefully be working again, Richard said. We can discuss fair rent at that point, something sustainable based on your income. Emma was silent for a long moment, turning her mug between her hands. Why are you doing all this, Richard? The truth, please. Not the generic I want to help explanation. Richard hadn't expected the direct question, though perhaps he should have. In the week since their first meeting, he'd come to appreciate Emma's straightforwardness. The truth? He considered his answer carefully. I've been successful beyond anything I could have imagined when I started my company. I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what actually matters. He gestured around the small apartment. You and Lily have reminded me. You're fighting so hard for each other, creating a home and happiness with almost nothing. Meanwhile, I have everything, and can't remember the last time I felt genuinely connected to anyone. Emma's expression softened slightly. So we're a pet project? A way to feel better about your privileged life? No, Richard said firmly. You're people who matter to me. Lily matters to me. You matter to me. If I'm being completely honest, these dinners have become the highlight of my week. Something shifted in Emma's eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition of the vulnerability in his admission. I'll think about the apartment, she finally said. But I need to talk to Lily first. She's had enough disruption in her life. Of course, Richard agreed, relieved she hadn't rejected the idea outright. Take whatever time you need. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but an undercurrent of awareness remained between them, a recognition that boundaries were blurring, that what had begun as simple assistance was evolving into something more complicated. As Richard prepared to leave, Emma handed him a small paper bag. "Lily insisted," she explained. "It's a thank you for the books you brought last week." Inside the bag, Richard found a carefully folded origami crane, clearly made by small hands with great concentration. A note in Lily's precise printing read, "Birds bring good luck. Thank you for being our friend." The simple gift affected Richard more deeply than any expensive token of appreciation he'd ever received. "Tell her I love it," he said, his voice slightly rough. "I'll put it on my desk at work." Emma nodded, then hesitated before adding, "You know, she talks about you all the time. Her teacher asked who the man in her community project was, and Lily told her you were her almost dad." Richard felt something catch in his chest. "Emma, I'm not trying to replace—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable. I just thought you should know that you've become important to her. To us," she added almost inaudibly. The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, delicate and significant. Richard nodded, uncertain how to respond without overstepping. "I'll call tomorrow about the apartment viewings," he said finally. "No pressure, just information." As his car pulled away from the curb, Richard found himself in unfamiliar emotional territory. In the corporate world, he navigated complex relationships with confidence, always aware of the underlying motives and potential outcomes. But this situation defied his usual analytical approach. His involvement with Emma and Lily had begun as compassion, but was transforming into something he couldn't quite define, something that both exhilarated and terrified him. His phone buzzed with a text from Julian Niles, his second-in-command and oldest friend at Horizon. "Where have you been disappearing to these days? Board members are noticing your early exits. We need to talk." Richard sighed, realizing he'd been neglecting certain aspects of his professional life. Julian had always been his most pragmatic advisor, focused relentlessly on the company's interests above all else. He wouldn't understand Richard's growing preoccupation with a struggling single mother and her daughter. "Tomorrow," he texted back, then silenced his phone. For tonight, at least. He wanted to preserve the warmth he felt from Lily's paper crane and Emma's quiet acknowledgement. Tomorrow would bring complications enough. Julian Niles waited in Richard's office, examining the origami crane now perched prominently on the otherwise meticulously organized desk. At 50, Julian was still trim and energetic, with sharp features and calculating eyes that missed nothing. As Horizon's chief strategy officer, he had been instrumental in the company's rise, often making the hard decisions that Richard sometimes shied away from. "Interesting decoration," Julian remarked when Richard entered. "Not your usual taste." Richard set down his briefcase. "A gift from a friend." "A friend with children, apparently," Julian observed, "or perhaps the artistic skills of one. Which brings me to my concern." He leaned forward. "You've missed 2 board dinners, rescheduled meetings with major investors, and disappeared every afternoon for weeks. People are talking, Richard." "I'm handling my responsibilities," Richard replied more defensively than he'd intended. "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting you seem distracted." "And in our position, distraction is weakness." Julian's voice remained calm, reasonable. "We're in the final stages of the Medicore acquisition. The board expects your full attention." Richard nodded, acknowledging the point. "You're right. I'll be more present going forward." Julian studied him, clearly unsatisfied with the response. "Who is she?" "Excuse me?" "The woman who's suddenly commanding so much of your time." "Is it serious? Because if it's just a fling, may I suggest waiting until after the acquisition?" Richard felt a flare of irritation. "My personal life isn't company business, Julian." "It is when it affects company performance," Julian countered smoothly. "Look, I'm not judging. God knows you deserve some happiness after Sarah." He referred to Richard's ex-wife, whose divorce settlement 3 years earlier had been as public as it was acrimonious. "Just be careful. The board remembers how that distracted you." "This is different," Richard said firmly. Julian raised an eyebrow. "So there is someone interesting." He leaned back. "Well, whoever she is, I hope she's worth the attention you're diverting from the company you built." The conversation shifted to business matters, but Richard remained unsettled. Julian knew him too well, could read the changes in him with uncomfortable accuracy. More concerning was the reminder of his responsibilities to Horizon, responsibilities he couldn't simply set aside, no matter how compelling his reasons. Later that afternoon, Richard sat in a coffee shop near Emma's apartment, waiting for her. They had viewed the Chelsea brownstone that morning, and he'd left her to discuss it privately with Lily. The cafe was modest but clean, the kind of place that hadn't yet fallen victim to gentrification. Emma arrived looking thoughtful, a folder tucked under her arm. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Lily's teacher wanted to talk about her progress. Good news, I hope?" "Very good," Emma smiled. "She's thriving. The teacher says she's showing academic abilities well above grade level, especially in reading and math." Richard felt a disproportionate surge of pride. "That's fantastic." "It is," Emma agreed, then took a deep breath. "About the apartment, we'd like to accept your offer. Lily was so excited about having her own room that I couldn't bear to disappoint her." Relief washed over Richard. "You won't regret it. The location is perfect for her school, and the air quality alone will make a difference in your recovery." "I have conditions," Emma interjected, her tone businesslike. "First, I want a proper contract, specifying my responsibilities regarding the renovation and a fair market assessment of what rent should be once I'm employed again." Of course, Richard agreed immediately. "Second, I want to contribute something now. I can't pay rent yet, but I've been thinking." She opened the folder and removed several sketches. "These are designs I've been working on. Children's clothes that can adjust as they grow. The concept is sustainable fashion that reduces waste and saves parents money." Richard examined the sketches, impressed by their detail and innovation. "These are excellent, Emma. I want to try selling them," she said. "Maybe just online at first, but eventually building a small business. I'd use part of any profits to contribute toward our living expenses." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Richard said sincerely. "I could help you set up a—" "No," Emma interrupted firmly. "I appreciate your offer, but I need to do this myself. What I would like is your business perspective, advice, not funding." Richard nodded, respecting her determination. "I'm happy to advise. These designs really are remarkable, Emma, especially this adjustable waistband concept." "Thank you," she said, a hint of color touching her cheeks at the praise. "I've been sketching whenever I have energy. It feels good to be creating again." As they continued discussing her business ideas, Richard was struck by her resilience and vision. Despite everything she'd endured, Emma hadn't lost sight of her passion or her determination to stand on her own. Their conversation was interrupted by Richard's phone buzzing insistently. He checked the screen, frowning at Julian's name. "I'm sorry, I should take this." "It's my CSO." Emma nodded. "Go ahead. I'll get us refills." Richard answered as she walked to the counter. "Julian, what's so urgent?" "Where are you?" Julian demanded without preamble. "In a meeting. Why?" "A meeting that's not on your calendar, with someone who's not part of Horizon again." Julian's voice was tight with frustration. "Richard, I've just come from damage control with the Peterson Group. They were expecting you at the lunch presentation." Richard closed his eyes, cursing inwardly. He'd completely forgotten the meeting. "I apologize." "Something came up. Something or someone?" Julian asked pointedly. "Look, I've had my assistant reschedule, but the Peterson representatives weren't happy." "This isn't like you, Richard." "It won't happen again," Richard promised, watching as Emma ordered at the counter. Her profile in the afternoon light struck him with unexpected force, the quiet dignity she maintained despite everything. "It better not," Julian warned. "By the way, I've been meaning to ask, what's this research request you sent to legal about Meridian Apparel's hiring practices?" "That's nowhere near our industry." Richard tensed. He'd asked the legal department to look into Emma's situation with Meridian, hoping to understand what had happened. "Just exploring potential partnerships. Nothing concrete." Julian sounded skeptical. "Well, whatever it is, try to stay focused on Medicore for the next few weeks. We've worked too hard to lose momentum now." After ending the call, Richard sat troubled. Julian was right. He had responsibilities he couldn't ignore. a company depending on his leadership. Yet as Emma returned with fresh coffee, he couldn't bring himself to regret the time he'd invested in helping her and Lily. "Problem at work?" she asked, sliding his cup toward him. "Nothing serious," he assured her. "Just a scheduling conflict." Emma studied him with unexpected perception. "Richard, I've been meaning to ask, is your involvement with us causing issues for you professionally? Because the last thing Lily and I want is to complicate your life." "You haven't," he said firmly. "Your phone has rung 6 times during our coffee," Emma pointed out gently. "And you keep checking emails. It's okay if you need to focus on your company right now." Richard was struck by her consideration, how even in her difficult circumstances, she was concerned about imposing on him. "My work is always demanding," he admitted, "but helping you and Lily has given me perspective I didn't realize I was missing." Emma smiled slightly. "Still, we understand priorities. You built your company from nothing. Lily and I would never want to jeopardize that." The conversation shifted to moving logistics, but Richard remained preoccupied with the balance he was struggling to maintain. For the first time in years, his focus was divided, and he wasn't entirely comfortable with the feeling. 2 days later, as movers transported Emma and Lily's modest belongings to the Chelsea brownstone, Richard received an unexpected call from his legal department. "Mr. Kendall, about that Meridian Apparel inquiry," began Andrea Hayes, his head counsel. "We found something concerning. The complaint file against Emma Thompson wasn't just suspicious. It appears to have originated from within Horizon." Richard froze. "What are you saying?" "The documentation submitted to Meridian claiming Ms. Thompson was involved in labor exploitation came from a Horizon email server," Andrea explained. "It was anonymous, but the digital trail leads back to us." "That's impossible," Richard said. "We have no connection to Meridian or the fashion industry." "That's what makes it so strange," Andrea agreed. "The information was damaging enough that Meridian immediately rescinded their offer to Ms. Thompson. It claimed she had been involved in a sweatshop scandal in Indonesia, completely fabricated, as far as we can tell." "Who sent it?" Richard demanded. "We're still tracing that," Andrea replied. "The account was created and deleted the same day, but whoever did it knew our systems well enough to cover their tracks. It had to be someone with significant internal access." After ending the call, Richard sat stunned. Someone at Horizon had deliberately sabotaged Emma's career opportunity. But who? And why target a struggling designer with no apparent connection to the company? The question plagued him as he arrived at the brownstone to help Emma and Lily settle in. The garden apartment had been professionally cleaned and painted in preparation for their arrival. Though modestly furnished, it was a world away from their previous living situation. Lily's excitement was infectious as she explored her new bedroom, marveling at the small garden visible through her window. "Mom, there's a squirrel out there. Can we feed him?" Emma smiled, looking more relaxed than Richard had ever seen her. "We'll have to research what's healthy for squirrels first." As they unpacked, Richard watched their interactions, struck by how quickly they adapted to their new surroundings, finding joy in simple things like a functional kitchen and reliable hot water. It reinforced his determination to uncover who had interfered with Emma's career. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Richard and Emma sat in the small garden. The autumn air crisp but not yet cold. "Thank you," Emma said quietly, "not just for the apartment, but for believing in us." "You don't need to thank me," Richard replied. "If anything, I should thank you and Lily. You've reminded me what matters." Emma studied him in the dim light. "Something's troubling you, though. You've been distracted all evening." Richard hesitated, unsure whether to share what he'd learned. Finally, he decided on honesty. "The legal team discovered something about your situation with Meridian Apparel. The false information that cost you the job apparently came from someone at my company." Emma stared at him. "Your company? But why would anyone at Horizon target me? I didn't even know you then." "I don't know," Richard admitted, "but I intend to find out." "Could it be a mistake?" Emma suggested. "Some kind of system error?" "No," Richard said grimly. "This was deliberate. Someone went to considerable effort to sabotage your opportunity, then covered their tracks." Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking vulnerable. "That's frightening, honestly. To think someone intentionally harmed us for no apparent reason. I promise you, Richard said with quiet intensity, I will find out who did this and why, and they will be held accountable. As he left the brownstone that night, Richard's mind churned with possibilities. Who at Horizon would have targeted Emma specifically? What possible motivation could explain such an action? And most troubling, was it connected to his current involvement with her and Lily? His phone lit up with a text from Julian. Need to discuss Horizon Foundation's public image. Hearing concerns about your recent activities. Breakfast tomorrow? Richard frowned at the message. Julian had always been protective of the company's reputation, sometimes excessively so. But recent activities suggested he knew something about Richard's involvement with Emma and Lily. Usual place, he texted back, a sense of unease settling over him. Whatever was happening, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important, that beneath the surface of his good intentions lay complications he hadn't anticipated. And somehow Julian Niles seemed to be at the center of it all. The Gramercy Park Hotel's restaurant was nearly empty at 8 in the morning, just as Julian preferred. He sat at their usual corner table, scanning financial reports while occasionally glancing at the entrance. When Richard finally arrived, Julian noted his rumpled appearance with a critical eye. Late night? Julian inquired, setting aside his tablet. Richard signaled for coffee. Early morning. What's so urgent about the Foundation's image? Julian studied him for a moment before speaking. The board is concerned about your recent charitable activities, specifically your involvement with a certain single mother and her daughter. Richard stiffened. You've been having me followed? Don't be dramatic. Julian dismissed the accusation with a wave. New York is smaller than you think, especially in our circles. Peterson mentioned you'd been asking questions about a child at his restaurant. Then you started leaving the office early, missing meetings. It wasn't difficult to connect the dots. My personal life isn't board business, Richard said evenly. It becomes board business when the CEO of a publicly traded company is making questionable decisions that could affect shareholder value. Julian leaned forward. Richard, I understand the impulse to help, but moving a woman and her child you barely know into your Chelsea property, setting up medical care, this goes beyond normal charity. Richard met his gaze steadily. I'm helping a family in need. Nothing inappropriate is happening. Perception matters more than reality, Julian countered. You know this. What happens when the media picks up the story? Tech billionaire moves struggling single mother into his property. The speculation would be immediate and damaging. I'm not concerned with speculation. Well, the board is, Julian said sharply, and they're not alone. I've received calls from 2 major investors expressing concern about your focus. He softened his tone. Richard, we've been friends for 20 years. I've supported every decision you've made, even when I disagreed. But this situation has the potential to derail everything we've built. Richard remained silent as the waiter delivered his coffee. When they were alone again, he asked, What do you know about Meridian Apparel? The question clearly caught Julian off guard. The clothing company? Nothing beyond their market position. Why? Someone from Horizon sent them false information about Emma Thompson a year ago, destroying her career opportunity, Richard said, watching Julian's reaction closely. Our legal team confirmed it. Julian's expression revealed genuine surprise, then calculation. That's concerning, but I fail to see the relevance to our current discussion. The relevance is that someone deliberately targeted Emma before I ever met her, Richard explained. Which raises the question, why would anyone at Horizon care about a struggling fashion designer with no connection to our industry? Julian frowned. Industrial espionage happens all the time, Richard. Some ambitious employee might have been doing opposition research for a friend at Meridian's competition. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy. Richard studied his oldest friend, searching for any sign of deception. Julian met his gaze steadily, his concern appearing genuine. Perhaps, Richard conceded, but I intend to find out who was responsible. As you should, Julian agreed smoothly. Corporate security breaches can't be tolerated, but that doesn't address the board's concerns about your current involvement with this family. What exactly is it you want from me, Julian? Julian sighed. Distance, professionalism. Set the family up with resources if you must, but maintain appropriate boundaries. Better yet, delegate their care to the foundation. We have programs designed for exactly these situations. And if I don't, then I can't protect you from the board's reaction, Julian said simply. They're already discussing contingency plans for leadership transition. The threat hung in the air between them. Richard had always known Julian to be ruthlessly pragmatic, but this level of interference felt unprecedented. I'll take it under advisement, Richard said finally, signaling the conversation was over. Now if there's nothing else, I have an actual scheduled meeting to attend. As he left the restaurant, Richard's mind raced. Julian's concerns about company image weren't unfounded. The media would certainly sensationalize his involvement with Emma and Lily if it became public. Yet something about Julian's intensity felt disproportionate, almost personal. Throughout the day, Richard immersed himself in work, determined to prove his professional focus remained sharp. He led the Medicore acquisition meeting with precision, negotiated terms that exceeded the board's expectations, and cleared his backlog of decisions requiring executive approval. Only when the office had emptied did he return to the question of who had sabotaged Emma's opportunity at Meridian. With most of the staff gone, Richard accessed the company's server logs himself, searching for any trace of the anonymous account mentioned by legal. Hours into his search, a pattern emerged. The account had been created using administrative credentials that only a handful of executives possessed. More concerning, the timing coincided perfectly with Meridian's announcement of their Sustainable Children's Clothing Initiative, the exact program Emma had been hired to develop. Richard sat back, troubled. This wasn't random corporate espionage. Someone had targeted Emma specifically in response to her potential position at Meridian. But why would anyone at Horizon care about a small fashion initiative? He was still pondering this question when his phone rang. It was Emma. "I'm sorry to call so late," she began, her voice tense. "But something strange happened today. A woman approached me outside Lily's school, claiming to be from Child Protective Services. She asked questions about our living situation, how we knew you, whether Lily was ever alone with you." Richard felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Did she identify herself?" "She had ID, but when I asked to call her office to verify, she said she'd return with a colleague. I've been trying CPS all afternoon. They have no record of an investigation involving Lily." "Where are you now?" Richard asked, already gathering his things. "Home. Lily's asleep." "Richard, what's happening?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I'm coming over. Don't open the door for anyone until I get there." The drive to Chelsea gave Richard time to process this new development. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The day after Julian warned him about his involvement with Emma and Lily, a fake CPS worker appears asking pointed questions. Someone was escalating the pressure, attempting to frighten Emma or gather information that could be used against them. Emma met him at the door, visibly relieved by his arrival. "I feel like I'm being paranoid," she said as they sat in the living room. "But after what you told me about Meridian—" "You're not paranoid," Richard assured her. "This is connected. Did the woman take any photos or notes?" "She was recording our conversation on her phone," Emma recalled. "Said it was standard procedure." Richard nodded grimly. "They're building something, documentation, a narrative." "But why?" Emma asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. "We're nobody. What possible threat could Lily and I pose to anyone?" The question haunted Richard as he checked the apartment's security, ensuring all windows and doors were properly locked. The brownstone had a modern security system he'd had installed before they moved in, but he found himself wishing he'd implemented more extensive measures. "I think," he said carefully, "that you're not the target." "I am?" Emma stared at him. "That makes even less sense. Why would hurting us hurt you? We've only known you a few weeks." Richard hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "Because in those weeks you and Lily have become important to me. More important than some people at Horizon are comfortable with." Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. "You think someone from your company is behind this?" "I can't prove it yet," Richard admitted. "But yes, I do." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Richard, Lily and I appreciate everything you've done for us. But if our presence in your life is causing these kinds of problems, perhaps we should—" "Don't," he interrupted more forcefully than intended. Don't suggest pulling away as the solution. That's exactly what they want. The intensity of his response surprised them both. Richard took a breath, moderating his tone. Emma, before I met you and Lily, my life was nothing but work. Endless meetings, acquisition strategies, profit margins. I was successful by every conventional measure, and completely empty inside. He met her gaze directly. You two have reminded me there's more to life than quarterly reports and stock prices. Emma's expression softened. Richard, I'm glad we've had a positive effect on your life. But I have to think about Lily's safety and well-being first. If someone is targeting us because of our connection to you, I understand, Richard said quietly. And I would never want to put either of you at risk. If you feel it's best to create distance between us, I'll respect that decision. But please know I'm capable of protecting you both if you'll let me. The vulnerability in his request hung between them. After a long moment, Emma reached out and took his hand, the gesture bridging more than just physical distance. We're not going anywhere, she said firmly. Whoever is doing this doesn't get to decide who's in our lives. But we need to be smart about this, Richard. For Lily's sake. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by renewed determination. Tomorrow I'll arrange for additional security, discreet but effective, and I'll continue investigating the Meridian connection. Whoever is behind this left traces, and I will find them. Later, as Richard prepared to leave, he paused in the hallway where Lily had hung her latest artwork, a colorful depiction of their new home, complete with the garden squirrel she'd been delighted to discover. The simple joy in her creation reinforced his resolve. I'll get to the bottom of this, he promised Emma at the door. In the meantime, call me immediately if anything else unusual happens. She nodded, then hesitated. Richard, there's something else. Today, when I was picking up Lily from school, I overheard two mothers talking about a gossip item in page 6, something about the CEO of Horizon Technologies showing special interest in a disadvantaged family. They didn't mention names, but Richard tensed. Already in the press? That was faster than I expected. It wasn't detailed, Emma assured him. Just vague insinuations, but it confirms someone is trying to create a story. Let them try, Richard said with more confidence than he felt. We've done nothing wrong. As he drove home, his phone lit up with a text from Julian. Board emergency meeting called for 7 a.m. tomorrow. Media inquiries coming in about your charitable project. Need to talk before the meeting. Richard didn't respond, his suspicions hardening. The sequence of events was too coordinated, too precise. Julian had warned him. Then immediately the pressure had escalated. The fake CPS worker, the strategic media leak. It suggested not just opposition, but a calculated campaign. In his penthouse, Richard pulled out his laptop and began compiling everything he knew. The timeline of his involvement with Emma and Lily, the sabotage of Emma's Meridian opportunity, Julian's warnings, the false CPS visit, the media leak. When laid out chronologically, the pattern became unmistakable. Each escalation perfectly timed for maximum impact. This wasn't just about protecting Horizon's image. This was personal, meticulous, and increasingly dangerous. As midnight approached, Richard received an email from Andrea in legal. The subject line read simply, "Found something." The attached document was a buried record of a Horizon subsidiary, one Richard barely remembered approving, making a significant investment in a direct competitor to Meridian's sustainable children's clothing initiative. The timing of the investment, 1 week after Emma Thompson was removed from consideration for the Meridian project. The subsidiary's executive director, a former college roommate of Julian Niles. Richard stared at the screen, the final piece clicking into place with cold clarity. This wasn't about corporate image or Richard's focus on the company. This was about money, Julian's money, invested in a venture that would have faced serious competition from Emma's designs at Meridian. Julian hadn't just warned Richard away from Emma and Lily. He had been responsible for Emma's career derailment in the first place. And now that Richard was helping her rebuild, Julian saw his investment threatened once again. The realization settled over Richard like ice. His oldest friend, his most trusted advisor, had deliberately destroyed a woman's career for financial gain, then watched her and her child suffer the consequences, without a flicker of remorse. The question now was how far Julian would go to protect his investment, and how Richard would respond when they faced each other across the boardroom table in just a few hours. Dawn broke over Manhattan as Richard arrived at Horizon headquarters, the early hour ensuring the lobby was nearly empty. He'd spent most of the night preparing, gathering evidence and planning his approach. Now, as he rode the elevator to the executive floor, he steeled himself for the confrontation ahead. Julian was waiting outside the boardroom, impeccably dressed as always, fair tablet in hand and concern etched on his features. "Finally," Julian said, glancing at his watch. "The board is assembling. We need to align our strategy before—" "No," Richard interrupted calmly. "We don't?" Julian blinked, taken aback by the steel in Richard's voice. "Richard, you're not thinking clearly. This situation with the Thompson woman has become a liability. Page 6 is just the beginning. I've had calls from the Journal and—" "When did you decide to target Emma specifically?" Richard asked, watching Julian's reaction closely. "Was it when Meridian announced her hiring? Or did you know about her designs before that?" Julian's expression flickered, surprise quickly masked by confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Kidgrow," Richard said, naming the competing children's clothing company Julian had invested in. "Emma's adjustable clothing concept would have made their fixed-size model obsolete. That's why you had to make sure she never got to Meridian." The calculated bewilderment on Julian's face would have been convincing to anyone who hadn't known him for 20 years. "Richard, I have no idea what you're implying. If you're suggesting I had something to do with your charity case's employment history—" "Stop," Richard cut him off sharply. "I have the records, Julian. The anonymous account that sent the false information to Meridian was created using your administrative credentials. I have the server logs, the timing of your investment through Horizon's subsidiary, everything." The mask slipped then, just slightly, a tightening around Julian's eyes, a recalculation visible in his expression. "Even if that were true," Julian said carefully, "which I categorically deny, what exactly do you think you can prove? A technical glitch in our server logs? A routine investment decision? Please." His tone grew conciliatory. "Richard, we've been friends too long for this kind of absurd accusation. Whatever you think you found has an explanation." Richard studied the man he'd trusted for 2 decades, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. "Did you send the fake CPS worker too? Or just arrange for the page 6 leak?" Julian's smile was thin. "Now you're being paranoid. This is exactly what the board is concerned about. Your judgment is compromised. This woman and her child have become an unhealthy fixation." "An unhealthy fixation," Richard repeated. "That's your diagnosis. Not that I simply recognized a wrong that needed to be righted." "Call it whatever makes you feel noble," Julian shrugged. "The board won't see it that way. They'll see a CEO who's neglecting his responsibilities, making questionable personal decisions, and now hurling wild accusations at his CSO to justify his behavior." For a moment, Richard almost doubted himself. Julian had always been persuasive, his confidence so absolute it could make reality seem malleable. But then Richard remembered Emma's face when she described losing her opportunity at Meridian, remembered Lily carefully collecting food scraps while wearing that oversized red apron. "Let's take this inside," Richard said, gesturing toward the boardroom. "I'm interested to hear how you'll explain everything to the full board." Julian's expression hardened. "Think carefully, Richard. Once we go through those doors, there's no turning back. For either of us." "I'm counting on that," Richard replied. The boardroom fell silent as they entered. 12 people sat around the massive table, their expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. Eliza Warren, the chairwoman, spoke first. "Richard, Julian, thank you for joining us at this early hour. We've called this emergency session to address the situation developing in the press regarding—" "If I may, Eliza," Richard interjected politely, "I believe there's a more fundamental issue the board should consider first." She gestured for him to continue, her sharp eyes assessing. Richard remained standing, deliberately positioning himself apart from Julian. "For the past month, I've been helping a single mother and her 5-year-old daughter who were in desperate circumstances. This assistance has apparently become a source of concern for some." He glanced briefly at Julian. "What you may not know is that this situation connects directly to Horizon in a troubling way. Over the next 15 minutes, Richard methodically presented the evidence he'd gathered. The sabotage of Emma's career opportunity, the server logs showing Julian's administrative credentials, the suspiciously timed investment in KidGrow, the escalating pressure tactics after Richard began helping Emma. Julian remained silent throughout, his expression impassive. Only someone who knew him well would notice the slight tension in his jaw, the calculating look as he assessed each board member's reaction. When Richard finished, Eliza turned to Julian. "These are serious allegations. How do you respond?" Julian's laugh was dismissive. "With all due respect to Richard's investigative skills, this is a desperate attempt to justify behavior that has raised legitimate concerns among our investors. Yes, I was involved with the KidGrow investment. It's proven quite profitable for our portfolio. No, I did not sabotage some random designer's career. The server credentials could easily have been compromised. Richard is seeing conspiracies where there are only coincidences. And the timing," Richard pressed. "Emma was hired by Meridian to develop exactly the kind of adjustable children's clothing that would compete directly with KidGrow's product line. 1 week after anonymous information destroys her opportunity. You invest in KidGrow through a Horizon subsidiary most board members don't even know exists. Business opportunities emerge constantly," Julian countered smoothly. "We pursued a promising investment. That's our job." The board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the conflict unfolding before them. Eliza studied both men, her expression unreadable. "What is it you're asking for, Richard?" she finally asked. "An internal investigation," Richard replied, "conducted by an independent party with full access to our systems. If I'm wrong, I'll accept whatever consequences the board deems appropriate for making false accusations. But if I'm right," he looked directly at Julian, "then we need to address not just an ethical breach but potential legal liability." Julian's calm facade cracked slightly. "This is absurd. We're wasting valuable time that should be focused on the Medicor acquisition. Richard has allowed a personal charity project to cloud his judgment, and now he's dragging the entire board into his melodrama." "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "I think we should hear more." All heads turned to see Andrea Hayes from legal, holding a folder and looking apologetic for the interruption. "Ms. Hayes," Eliza acknowledged with surprise, "this is a closed board meeting." "I apologize for the intrusion," Andrea said, "but I've discovered additional information relevant to this discussion." She glanced at Richard. "Information I was only able to verify an hour ago." Richard nodded for her to continue, ignoring Julian's darkening expression. Andrea opened her folder. "In reviewing the server logs more thoroughly, we found that the anonymous account that contacted Meridian Apparel was accessed from a specific IP address, Mr. Niles's home network. Additionally, we've uncovered emails between Mr. Niles and executives at KidGrow discussing a potential obstacle, being permanently removed from consideration at Meridian." She placed the documents on the table. "The timing matches precisely with Ms. Thompson's dismissal." The room fell silent as board members processed this new information. Julian's expression had gone completely still, his eyes calculating as he assessed his position. "Furthermore," Andrea continued, "we've traced the recent media leak about Mr. Kendall's involvement with the Thompson family to a PR firm that exclusively represents KidGrow, the same firm that appears to have arranged for someone to impersonate a Child Protective Services worker." Eliza Warren's expression hardened as she turned to Julian. "Is this true?" Julian's response was measured, his tone reasonable despite the damning evidence. "Business requires difficult decisions, Eliza. You know this better than most. Yes, I protected our investment in KidGrow. Yes, I was concerned about Richard's growing obsession with this woman and her child. Everything I've done has been to protect Horizon's interests. By destroying an innocent woman's career," Richard demanded. "By subjecting a 5-year-old child to poverty and hardship." Julian's laugh was cold. "Don't be so dramatic, Richard. There are thousands of struggling single mothers in New York alone. This one simply had the misfortune of designing something that threatened a valuable investment." His gaze swept the room. "Each of you has made similar calculations. You've simply had the luxury of distance from the consequences." The board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Richard realized with a sinking feeling that while Julian's actions might disturb them, They weren't entirely shocked. The ruthless pursuit of profit often involved casualties. Julian had simply been indiscreet enough to get caught. Eliza finally broke the silence. In light of this information, I believe we need to temporarily relieve Mr. Niles of his duties, pending a full investigation. She turned to Richard. As for your involvement with the Thompson family, while your intentions appear honorable, the board remains concerned about potential impacts on Horizon's public image. Richard straightened, suddenly clear about the choice before him. With respect, Eliza, if the board's primary concern is public image rather than the fact that our company was used to deliberately harm an innocent family, then perhaps my priorities no longer align with Horizon's. The implication hung in the air. Julian's smile was faint but triumphant. He recognized the opening Richard had just provided. Are you threatening to resign, Richard? Eliza asked carefully. I'm stating a fact, Richard replied. I founded this company to create technology that helps people. Somewhere along the way, profit became the only metric that mattered. I can't continue to lead a company that values its stock price over basic human decency. Julian seized the opportunity. This emotional response perfectly illustrates my concerns. Richard is willing to abandon the company he built, putting thousands of jobs at risk, all for a woman he barely knows. I know enough, Richard said firmly. I know Emma Thompson is a talented designer who had her career destroyed by corporate greed. I know her daughter Lily has shown more courage and dignity at 5 than many adults ever manage. And I know I can't continue to lead Horizon if we're unwilling to acknowledge and rectify the harm we've caused. The ultimatum silenced the room. Board members exchanged uneasy glances, calculating the impact of losing their founder and CEO against the public relations nightmare that could unfold if the full story emerged. Eliza's expression was unreadable as she considered Richard's position. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to consider. Her suggestion was interrupted by Richard's phone ringing. He glanced at the screen, immediately concerned when he saw Emma's name. Excuse me, I need to take this. Stepping into the hallway, Richard answered urgently. Emma, is everything all right? Her voice was tight with fear. Richard, Lily is missing. I went to wake her for school and she's not in her bed. The apartment door was unlocked. Ice flooded Richard's veins. Have you called the police? Yes, they're on their way, but Richard... Emma's voice broke. There was a note on her pillow. It said, if I go away, nobody will have to fight anymore. She must have overheard us talking last night about the person targeting us. I'm coming right now, Richard said, already moving toward the elevator. Stay there in case she's just hiding somewhere in the building. When he returned to the boardroom to collect his things, the tension was palpable. I have to go, he said simply. Emma's daughter is missing. Julian's expression flickered with what might have been genuine concern, or perhaps just calculation. Richard, I'm sure there's a simple explanation. Children wander off. Enough, Richard cut him off. This has gone far enough. A 5-year-old child is missing because she believes she's the cause of our conflict. Whatever happens next between us, Julian, remember that. As Richard turned to leave, Eliza spoke up. The board hasn't dismissed you, Richard. We haven't even voted on any action. Richard paused at the door. Right now, I don't care. There's a frightened little girl out there who matters more than any vote, any company, any position. That clarity at least I can thank Julian for. The elevator descent felt interminable. Richard's mind raced with possibilities. Where would a 5-year-old go if she wanted to remove herself from a situation? What places would Lily consider safe or familiar? As he burst into the lobby, his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Police arrived. Checking building security cameras. Richard's driver was waiting outside, alerted by a hasty text during the elevator ride. Chelsea as fast as you can, Richard instructed, sliding into the back seat. As the car navigated morning traffic, Richard found himself mentally retracing Lily's known routines. School, the park 2 blocks from the brownstone, the small bakery where he sometimes took her for treats. None seemed likely as a destination for a child trying to go away. Then it hit him, the Silver Spoon, the restaurant where he'd first seen her, where she'd felt she had purpose and contribution. It was familiar territory where she'd been independent before. Change of plan, Richard directed his driver. Midtown, the Silver Spoon restaurant. The driver nodded, changing course. Richard texted Emma his hunch. then sat forward tensely as the car navigated crosstown traffic. Morning light was just warming the city streets when they arrived. The restaurant wouldn't open for hours, but Richard remembered Lily mentioning that deliveries came early. She would know this from her months of working there. Sure enough, as they approached, Richard spotted a small figure huddled in the service alley beside the restaurant, a familiar red apron clutched in her hands like a security blanket. "Stop here," he instructed the driver, then approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. Lily looked up as his shadow fell across her, her small face tear-stained but resolute. "Mr. Richard," she acknowledged quietly, "I didn't think you'd find me." Richard crouched down to her level. "Your mum and I have been very worried about you, Lily." She looked down at her hands. "I heard you talking. Someone is being mean to you and Mom because of me." "No, sweetheart," Richard said gently. "Not because of you. Because of choices that adults have made. None of this is your fault. But if I go back to collecting food here," she reasoned with heartbreaking logic, "then you and Mom won't have to worry anymore. You can go back to your building and Mom will get better, and nobody will be mad." Richard felt something break inside him. The last barrier between professional calculation and pure human connection. This child, in her innocent wisdom, was willing to sacrifice her happiness and security to protect the adults in her life. "Lily," he said softly, "do you remember the pinky promise I made you?" She nodded. "I promised I wouldn't disappear. And I meant it." He held out his hand. "Your mom is very scared right now. Let's call her and let her know you're safe, okay?" Lily hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. "Are you sure I'm not making everything bad?" "I'm absolutely certain," Richard said firmly. "In fact, you and your mum have made my life better than it's been in a very long time." As he lifted Lily into his arms, her red apron still clutched in one hand, Richard felt a certainty settle over him. Whatever happened with Horizon, with Julian, with the board, this was what mattered. This child's trust, her mother's resilience, the family they might become together. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from Julian, but Richard silenced it without a second thought. Some choices once made defined everything that followed, and Richard had just made his. The weeks following Lily's disappearance unfolded with a momentum that swept all three of their lives into new territory. Richard's abrupt departure from the boardroom that morning had set events in motion that couldn't be reversed, nor did he want them to be. Emma had been waiting at the brownstone entrance when Richard arrived with Lily, her face a portrait of relief and lingering fear. The reunion between mother and daughter had been wordless at first, just Emma kneeling to gather Lily in her arms, holding her as if she might disappear again at any moment. "Don't ever do that again," Emma had finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Nothing is worth risking your safety, Lily. Nothing." "I'm sorry, Mommy," Lily had replied, her small hands patting Emma's tear-stained cheeks. "Mr. Richard found me. He kept his promise." The simple statement had caught Emma's attention, her eyes rising to meet Richard's over Lily's head. Something had passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of boundaries crossed, of connections deepened beyond simple charity or gratitude. Now, 3 weeks later, Richard sat in his temporary office in a WeWork downtown, finalizing the press release that would formally announce his resignation as CEO of Horizon Technologies. The board had initially refused to accept it, fearful of investor reaction, but Richard had been adamant. After Julian's actions came to light, continuing as if nothing had happened was impossible. Julian himself had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, but Richard harbored no illusions about the likely outcome. Men like Julian Niles rarely faced real consequences. At worst, he would receive a golden parachute and land softly at another corporation within months. The system was designed to protect its own. A knock at the door interrupted Richard's thoughts. His new assistant, Maya, poked her head in. "Emma Thompson is here to see you." Richard straightened, surprised. "Show her in, please." Emma entered, looking transformed from the woman he'd first met. Health had returned to her face, confidence to her posture. She wore a simple but stylish outfit, her own design, he knew, and carried a portfolio under her arm. "Is everything all right?" Richard asked, concerned by the unexpected visit. "Lily is fine," Emma assured him with a smile. "She's at school excelling in Ms. Rodriguez's class." She set her portfolio on his desk. "I came to show you something." Richard gestured for her to sit. "I'm intrigued." Emma opened the portfolio to reveal professional photographs of children modeling clothing, pieces he recognized as her designs, now brought to life in vibrant fabrics. "The samples are finished, 5 complete outfits with the adjustable features fully implemented." "Emma, they're remarkable," Richard said, genuinely impressed as he examined the detailed photos. "When did you manage this?" "I've been working while Lily's at school," she explained. "A former colleague from design school connected me with a small manufacturing cooperative in Brooklyn. They're committed to ethical production methods, which aligns perfectly with my vision." Pride radiated from her as she turned to another page showing the clothes from different angles, demonstrating how they could be adjusted to accommodate a growing child. "What do you think?" "Be honest." "I think they're brilliant," Richard said sincerely. "The designs are beautiful, and the functionality is unlike anything I've seen. You've solved a real problem for parents." Emma's smile widened. "That's not all." She revealed the final page, a formal letter with the Meridian Apparel letterhead. "They've reconsidered my application. After the truth about the false accusations came out, they reached out to apologize and discuss a potential collaboration." Richard felt a surge of satisfaction. Following his resignation announcement, the full story of Julian's interference had leaked to the press, not through Richard, who had maintained a dignified silence, but through other Horizon employees disturbed by what had happened. The subsequent media coverage had not only cleared Emma's name but generated interest in her innovative designs. "That's wonderful news. Emma, you deserve this opportunity." She studied him for a moment. "What about you? Any regrets about stepping down?" Richard shook his head. "None. The company will continue without me. The board appointed Eliza Warren as interim CEO, which was actually my recommendation." "She has integrity. And your new venture?" Emma asked, gesturing around the modest office space. A smile touched Richard's lips. "Kendall Foundation is officially incorporated. We'll focus on supporting single parents with entrepreneurial ambitions, providing not just funding, but mentorship, childcare solutions, healthcare, the things that make success actually possible." "It suits you," Emma said softly. "Much better than endless acquisition meetings." "It does," Richard agreed, "though I'm still adjusting to the smaller office." They shared a laugh, the ease between them, a testament to how far they'd come from that first night in her apartment. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Emma said, her expression growing more serious. "It's about the brownstone apartment." Richard tensed slightly. "Is there a problem? Do you need repairs?" "No, nothing like that. It's—" She hesitated. "Now that I have this opportunity with Meridian, I'll be able to afford proper housing for Lily and myself. I want to start paying rent, real rent, not the nominal amount we agreed on during my recovery." "That's not necessary," Richard began, but Emma held up a hand. "It is to me. You've done so much, Richard, but I need to stand on my own. Lily and I both do." Her expression softened. "I'm not saying we don't want you in our lives. Quite the opposite. But the foundation of whatever relationship we build moving forward needs to be equality, not dependence." Richard considered her words, recognizing the truth in them. The pride that had initially struck him as stubborn when they first met now revealed itself as essential dignity, a core value he deeply respected. "I understand," he said finally. "We can draw up a proper lease agreement." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Thank you. And speaking of Lily, she has a presentation at school next Friday. Community Helpers Day. She's asked if you would come." "I wouldn't miss it," Richard promised. As Emma gathered her portfolio, preparing to leave, Richard was struck by how different she looked from the exhausted woman he'd met that first night. Not just healthier, but more alive, her natural vibrancy restored. "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said quietly. "What you've accomplished in just a few months is remarkable." She paused at the door. "I had help," she acknowledged. "But more importantly, I had someone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Her smile held something new. Not gratitude, but partnership. "Lily and I will see you Friday? Maybe dinner after?" "I'll be there," Richard assured her. After she left, Richard returned to his resignation letter with renewed purpose. The decision that had seemed so momentous in the boardroom now felt like the most natural choice he'd ever made. Horizon would continue without him, likely just as profitable, possibly more cautious about ethical corners cut. But Richard had found something that mattered more than corporate success, a chance to make a meaningful difference in individual lives, beginning with Emma and Lily. Friday arrived with perfect spring weather, the kind of day that made even Manhattan feel fresh and full of possibility. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with excitement as parents and guests found seats among the small chairs meant for children. Richard spotted Emma immediately, sitting in the second row, waving him over to the seat she'd saved. Around them, other parents chatted and adjusted cameras, preparing to document their children's moments in the spotlight. "You made it," Emma said, relief evident in her voice. "Lily was worried you'd be caught in a meeting." "Not a chance," Richard assured her, settling into the too small chair. "The foundation can function without me for a morning." The presentations began with the expected parade of children dressed as firefighters, doctors, police officers, and teachers, each explaining how their chosen community helper made the world better. Richard found himself genuinely entertained by the earnest explanations and occasional stage fright. When Lily's turn came, she walked confidently to the center of the stage, wearing not a costume but a simple dress, one of Emma's designs, Richard realized, recognizing the adjustable features cleverly incorporated into the seemingly traditional pattern. "My community helper doesn't have a uniform," Lily began, her voice clear and strong. "But he helps people find their way when they're lost." Richard felt Emma's hand slip into his, squeezing gently. "Some community helpers build buildings or fix cars or teach kids like me," Lily continued. "My community helper builds families and fixes hearts and teaches us that we all deserve second chances." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. Lily stood straighter, her gaze finding Richard in the crowd. "When my mum and I were having a really hard time, my community helper found us. He didn't just give us food or medicine or a place to live. He showed us that we weren't alone anymore." She held up a drawing, the same one from her earlier project showing the three of them together. "Community helpers don't have to wear special clothes or drive special trucks. Sometimes they just have to be brave enough to care when no one else does." Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion as Lily concluded her presentation. The applause was enthusiastic, with Emma clapping harder than anyone while discreetly wiping away tears. After the presentations, as children reunited with their parents in the school cafeteria, Lily ran straight to Richard, launching herself into his arms with complete trust that he would catch her. "Did you like it?" she asked eagerly. "Was it okay that I talked about you?" "It was perfect," Richard assured her, his voice rough with feeling. "I'm very proud of you, Lily." She beamed at him, then looked between him and Emma. "Can we go to the park before dinner? The ice cream truck might be there." Emma laughed. "I suppose we could make an exception today." As they left the school, Lily skipping ahead while keeping carefully within sight, Emma's hand found Richard's again. "She's right, you know," she said quietly. "About the ice cream truck?" Richard teased. Emma rolled her eyes. "About you. About what you did for us. It wasn't just the material help, though God knows we needed that. It was believing we deserved better when we'd almost stopped believing it ourselves." Richard considered this as they walked, watching Lily pause to examine a colorful chalk drawing on the sidewalk. "I think we all deserved better," he said finally. "Me included. I had everything except what matters most." Emma looked at him curiously. "And what's that?" "This," he said simply, gesturing to encompass their small group. "Connection, purpose, the chance to make a genuine difference in someone's life." They reached the park as afternoon sunlight filtered through fresh spring leaves. Lily had indeed spotted the ice cream truck and was practically vibrating with anticipation. "One scoop or two?" Richard called to her. "Two!" Lily replied immediately, then added with sudden concern, "Is that too much?" Richard exchanged a glance with Emma, both recognizing the echo of harder times when such small luxuries had been impossible. "Not today," he assured Lily. "Today is special." As they sat on a park bench, watching Lily carefully navigate her ice cream cone with the serious concentration she brought to everything, Emma leaned slightly against Richard's shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "With us, I mean." Richard considered the question. I think that's something we figure out together, one day at a time. No expectations, no obligations, just three people who found each other when they needed it most. Emma nodded, satisfied with the answer. I'd like that. Lily returned to them. Ice cream somehow smeared from her nose to her chin despite her best efforts at neatness. I saved some for you, she announced proudly, holding out a cone that had clearly suffered several strategic licks. Richard accepted it with appropriate solemnity. Thank you, Lily, that's very generous. That's what families do, she replied with simple certainty. They share the good stuff. Emma caught Richard's eye over their daughter's head, a smile playing at her lips. Neither corrected Lily's casual use of the word family. Perhaps definitions like Emma's remarkable clothing designs could adapt and grow to accommodate changing needs. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, the three of them walked together through the park, Lily between them, occasionally reaching for their hands when the path narrowed. To anyone observing, they might have appeared to be any family enjoying a spring day together, no hint of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them to this moment. Richard reflected on the journey that had led him from that first evening at the Silver Spoon to this park bench. He had lost a company, but found something far more precious. Not just Emma and Lily, though they were the catalyst, but a reconnection with his own humanity, a purpose that resonated beyond profit margins and market share. What are you thinking about? Emma asked, noting his contemplative expression. Richard smiled. I'm thinking that sometimes the most important turning points in our lives don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary moments, like seeing a child in a red apron collecting leftovers in a restaurant. Or opening your door to find a stranger who refuses to look away, Emma added softly. Lily, who had been listening with typical attentiveness, nodded as if they were discussing something obvious. That's how you know it's important, she declared with the wisdom sometimes granted to children. The big stuff doesn't need to be loud.